What's up, Dragon Brood? So today we're going to talk about how the Core Set 2021 early access event went, because there were some fun things that happened, and we have some pretty big takeaways that I think will help you in deck building while you're trying to figure out what you should be doing or what you should be playing in this new standard metagame. Anyway, let's just talk about the event itself. Honestly, it was a lot of fun, and thanks to Wizards of the Coast for even letting me participate in that thing, because it's kind of a cool reward for doing all this other content. That said, there were some players that really didn't seem like they wanted to be playing anything fun. They weren't using a ton of new cards. They were really just playing kind of their already tuned up tournament decks, and that was a little unfun. So that was a little boring, especially when you have people coming to watch the streams and just see all the fun cards. That aside, though, there was a lot of cool things, a lot of interesting things, and I think that's going to leave us a lot to talk about in this video. But first, if you hadn't, remember to like and subscribe to the channel, because that helps us out a ton. But let's go down our what we'll call new rules of engagement for the M21 standard metagame. Now, first things first, I know people look at them and say, oh, it's not that good, it's not as good as TEFERI, blah blah. Like, truth is, the new TEFERI is just good. Like, don't kid yourself. The fact that it can use abilities at instant speed, it can do stuff on each person's turn, like, it's doing a lot of things other planeswalkers don't do. The card's just flat out good, and it's going to be the centerpiece of a few decks. Ran into a couple that were pretty boring and just trying to like buy time and maybe draw into the thing that ends the turn. Yeah, but it's going to be the centerpiece of that style of deck, and there's not a lot you're going to be able to do about it. You can play things that outright kill planeswalkers, which is probably where you need to be focusing, but don't really, I guess what I'm saying is, don't undersell this card. There's a lot of people that were like, oh, it's not that good, and like, no, I thought it was going to be solid, but the card's actually really good. At least so far in the early goings, you're going to expect to see this card a lot. So just prepare for it. If you thought you were annoyed by the previous TEFERIs, well, congratulations, you now have a new one to be annoyed by. And if one planeswalker for control decks was exciting, then having a second new one's got to be even more exciting, right? No, it's really not, honestly. Even when I saw they reprinted UGIN, I was not excited about it. I didn't like UGIN being around the first time, and I'm not excited about it the second time. And being honest, it's not that I think the card is bad. The card's actually very good. All the play patterns around it are just boring. I mean, it just comes in, you use it as a sweeper that you can't do anything about because everything gets exiled. So even stuff like your heroic interventions and whatnot don't do anything, which is really kind of a disappointment to even have that card be available, and then the best sweeper some of these decks are going to play, you can't do anything about. Like, that's super frustrating. That said, you kind of have to have a plan, so whenever UGIN decides they're going to sweep for 4 or 5 mana to wipe away everything, then you need to be able to deal some amount of damage to UGIN to take it out. Usually your opponent's going to spend the majority, if not all of their mana on that turn to be able to cast the UGIN, so you do have a small window where the shields are down and you can actually take it out. So keep that in mind. That's going to be something you probably want to plan for, whether that's going to be a haste creature, some direct damage to it, a spell that you just target it with and kill it. Who knows? I mean, I did get lucky during the day because the Jund Death Touch deck that we were playing actually had the ability to take out planeswalkers outright, thanks to the new Blightfang, which was nice. But outside of that, it did take a little bit of work. I believe the Gruul deck, we were able to haste down one with a Gruul Spellbreaker at one point, but otherwise you can expect to see a lot of UGINs. One of the reasons you're going to be able to see a lot of UGINs is because it's the payoff card for a lot of these blue-green ramp decks, and my goodness, were there a lot. Probably the most, well, yeah, I would say that's probably what we ran into the most yesterday. There was tons of Growth Spirals, tons of Uros, tons of Nissas, all hanging out in the same deck, and literally kind of just added in UGIN, because why not? Like, if you can make all that mana, what would you do with it? So nothing really surprising in those lists. The only thing I would say, if there's anything really, is you can save a spell counter for something that they're going to try to play at that point, or if you have a way to get rid of Nissa early and or kill their lands so you can attack through to a Nissa, that's kind of another plan. But if you're going to be playing an aggressive deck, you need to have a plan for how you're going to get to the opponent, how you're going to be able to kill the planeswalkers, or how you're going to be able to kill them in lieu of the planeswalkers still sitting on the table. Now, different decks are going to have different ways to do that. Even something like the black-white life gain deck might just be casting Veto, hope to hit you with 6 or 7 life gain damage, and hope that's enough to finish the deal, right? Who knows? There's different ways you can do it, but it's something you have to keep in mind. Even the red decks may need to be packing more removal, so A, you can either punch down those planeswalkers, or you leave enough removal in your hand that once the board gets gummed up and your board gets swept away, maybe for some reason you can still shoot them for 6 damage or 9 damage and just end the game. It just means we're going to have to build decks entirely different than we have been before, but yeah, the blue-green decks were definitely plentiful. Now, conversely to some previous standard metas, it felt like going bigger was better. Literally everything you saw, like the tokens list I played in the early part of the day had a bunch of the smaller creatures, whatever. I took a break, retooled it, came back, and the stuff you can do with the bigger +1/+1 counter creatures was infinitely better. You know, I had a Gruul deck that had some of the smaller to the ground stuff. Came back with another Gruul deck that had just bigger, heavier creatures, and that was stronger. You know, for as much as we're saying like, well, a creature needs to do something the turn it comes into play and whatever, honestly, maybe that's just not where we're at right now. We just need things that are more impactful with the things they do. Because again, we're talking about TEFERI phasing a thing out, and UGIN, you know, just sweeping creatures away. So each thing that sticks after that point has to be big. It has to have a big ability, has to try to end the game, make more tokens, just do something more impactful than what some of the creatures are that we've been playing with. Now, is that bound to change by the end of the format? Very likely, but at least here in the early stages, that's what it feels like. So when you're building your decks, especially aggro decks, try to leave yourself a couple of big creature options or a couple of big finishers or a cool spell. You know, so keep your Ember Cleaves, don't take those out, you know, whatever it is, just to be trying to go big or go over the top to stay competitive with some of these other deck lists. And finally, the mono black decks were probably the second most popular deck we saw. Now, will that be the second most popular as far as actual standard meta play goes? I wouldn't going to go on a limb and say no at this point, but I do think you'll see a lot maybe in the early goings in the ladder as people are just trying to build the cool thing. So the deck we saw was Peer into the Abyss combined with Underworld Dreams. So the way it works is you take half your life, you draw that many cards, but then Underworld Dreams makes you take a damage for each card you draw. Well, if you just drew half, your remaining half is going to be equal to the damage from the Underworld Dreams, so you die. That's kind of how that works. Now, admittedly, the rest of the deck looks very much like the mono black control-ish decks you saw kind of at the beginning of last season, playing Ayara, Grey Merchant, things like that. But they're also playing the Nyx Lotus to try to get extra mana so they can cast the Peer into Abyss a little bit easier. For the most part, we dealt with those decks pretty well. We did lose twice to the combo, but it is very manageable. And if you have ways to get rid of enchantments, you also don't risk losing so much to the Underworld Dreams either. But it is something I think people need to be aware of that may not really have popped up on some people's radars leading into the event. Now, with all that being said, the format's still pretty wide open at this point. There's just going to be a lot of bigger, crazier things that we're doing with all this mana and all these big spells, and there's a lot of wild payoffs. And that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, let me correct that. I think like TEFERI and UGIN are bad things, but besides that, I think the rest was actually pretty fun on the day. Outside of those two cards, I actually thought there was a lot of neat things, a lot of cool ideas, a lot of ways I want to change my decks, which y'all will be seeing over the next couple of days here on the channel, but lots of cool stuff happening. So I think people should have a lot of fun with this standard metagame. Anyway, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, because we need all the help we can get. You're going to see those other videos the rest of this week and I guess leading into the next week. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.